So welcome back, everyone. We're now going to be moving on to the first of our two panel discussions. The first one being, what's next for the JSTOR print collections? Don't stop now. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Matthew. Hi, everyone. I'm Alison Wohlers, Chair Print Program Manager at California Digital Library. So today I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. And we know that JSTOR has been one of the touch points of how many of us have set up our print preservation strategies, whether that has been from the perspective of targeting it or actively avoiding it. And JSTOR as an organization has set an example of responsible print preservation by investing in 2 archives maintained by academic institution partners, and also remains open to new collaborative opportunities to serve the scholarly community. My own experience with JSTOR as an influence in this shared print sphere has been with the University of California and the Western Regional Storage Trust. In UC, it is a legendary project, one of the very few page-validated archives that exists in our shared print community, which you'll hear about from Cathy Martyniak in a moment. In West, we consider JSTOR to be a highly trustworthy source of digital content, and we know from our yearly selection statistics that JSTOR is the most referenced category of material targeted for shelf clearing. Much has already been accomplished around the JSTOR collection, but what we've learned over time is that we can't stop now. Today, this panel recalls our critical attention to JSTOR and particularly the potential to strengthen our overall preservation enterprise by increasing the connection between digital and print efforts. Now, I'm very happy to turn it over to our panelists for introductions and descriptions of their unique experiences with preserving JSTOR content.
I think I'm first, so I'll go ahead. Hi, everyone. I'm John Kiplinger, Director of Production for JSTOR. I was asked to say a few words first about how journal titles in particular get into JSTOR, and then also about the origin of the 2 JSTOR print repositories with which JSTOR has a direct working relationship. Regarding how journal titles get into JSTOR, first, JSTOR aligns our collection development plans with libraries' own collecting priorities and budgets. We do track academic trends and curriculum needs. We also monitor usage of existing content on the JSTOR platform itself to identify areas of high interest. And then when a specific journal is identified as being of interest, we conduct an extensive publication history, and the journal undergoes a review process that includes researching the extent of the library holdings as well as reviewing research and citation data, among other factors. If, after the review process, a journal looks like a good candidate for inclusion, then for content still under copyright, our content development and legal teams negotiate with the rights holders to secure licensing rights. If licensing rights are secured and if print source needs to be digitized, then the content management team works with the publisher, libraries, and commercial back issue vendors or antiquarian booksellers to secure loans, donations, or purchases of the needed issues, which then go through a detailed but very tried and true conversion process before appearing on the JSTOR site. As far as the origin of the JSTOR-sponsored print repositories are concerned, in the early 2000s, as JSTOR began to build trust among libraries, we could see that some of the libraries were in fact already deaccessioning print backruns for corresponding titles in JSTOR. In case of the need to rescan print issues either for disaster recovery or to facilitate improvements to the page images, and we also hoped to instill further confidence among libraries, we decided that we needed to establish a print repository to which JSTOR would have ready access. However, whereas we felt competent in digital preservation, we were much less certain about print preservation. In 2003, JSTOR convened a meeting of preservation librarians and library directors to discuss how best to proceed. Coming out of that meeting, we determined that we should fund the creation and maintenance of 2 geographically distant page-validated dark archives. To create these print repositories, we would need to partner with institutions that were very experienced in print preservation and storage in order that we could pool their knowledge and experience with JSTOR's own knowledge of the publications themselves. In 2004, we reached agreements with the University of California and with Harvard University. We continue to work with them and are just as a closing note, are very grateful for their stewardship of the print issues in both of those repositories. And with that, I will turn it over to the next panelist.
And that is our colleague, Amy.
Yes, thank you, John. A great handoff. My name is Amy Boucher, and I'm the Director of Access Services for Harvard Library, which includes oversight of the Harvard Depository, high-density storage facility located in the Boston metro area, which currently houses about 11 million items. And part of what is stored there is, as John mentioned, a JSTOR print repository. So we've had this partnership since 2004, when the initial agreement was developed and signed, and it's been renewed annually ever since with amendments as needed. Harvard provides a space for a repository of print materials scanned by JSTOR and also supplies staff time to support the various JSTOR workflows at the Harvard Depository, and then we are compensated to offset the expenses. This is a dark archive. The material is not owned by Harvard and is not visible or requestable to anyone other than depository staff. The dark archive is reflective of print versions that JSTOR has digitized. So in other words, if JSTOR gets a digital version of an issue from the publisher as an input, the print copy is not digitized by JSTOR and the issue is not included in the print repository. The JSTOR print repository at Harvard includes approximately 4,400, a little bit less, unique titles, some of which are not yet actually added but are destined for the repository at Harvard. And then within that number of titles, it's steadily built over the years to house a little over 500,000 completed items. And we do also have some items that are on the shelf that are not considered complete and part of the repository for various reasons related to the state of the item. So that number is not reflective of what's on the shelf. And there's 3 basic streams of work that happen at the Harvard Depository to support the JSTOR print repository. And the first is accessions of new issues to the collections, items that come to Harvard from JSTOR via the scanning vendor, and these items need to have volume verification, but not page, as they're considered complete as part of the archive upon arrival and then can be accessioned right away. One thing to note is that these items are accessioned regardless of the moving wall, because JSTOR typically processes new content well beyond the moving wall. So in cases where JSTOR continues to use print issues as a scanned resource, they would then get into the print repository well in advance of the digitized version's availability to users. The next workflow is scanner, is scanning. Harvard does scan to fill gaps, and at present, this accounts for the largest percentage of staff time spent on JSTOR work, scanning either pages or entire issues. And the scans actually come from Harvard-owned materials, and when complete, the electronic file goes to JSTOR, but the item stays in the Harvard collection. It is not a part of the print repository, and we do not have any special retention commitments for their particular. And lastly, there's a validation workflow, and certain new accessions need to have a page-by-page verification against the existing scan. So these new accessions are in contrast to the ones that come via the scanning vendor. These particular ones are donations to the print repository from other institutions, and at the time of scanning, JSTOR didn't have a physical copy that they could archive, but were later able to get that donation to add to the print repository at Harvard. So that's a really brief overview of the Harvard-based JSTOR print repository. I find it a bit ironic that the title of the session is Don't Stop Now, because we have in fact stopped work at the current situation, other than some administrative work, but we do hope to get back to it as soon as it's feasible, because it's something very important that we're able to do for the academic library community. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Moving to Cathy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cathy Martyniak, and I have been the director of the Southern Regional Library Facility, which is better known as the SRLF, since 2015. The SRLF opened in 1986. It holds approximately 7 million volumes. It's located on the UCLA campus, and we use what we call the California style of high-density shelving, which is not in trays and it's not in one big room. We have actual separate floors. We do have a sister facility called the NRLF located at Berkeley that also has 7 million volumes. Together, the RLFs manage 14 million of the 41 million print volumes held by the University of California Libraries. The collections in the RLFs are governed by a persistence policy. Once a volume is deposited, including JSTOR, it is considered persistent, meaning it cannot be removed ever. We do that so our depositors have trust in making attention to decisions of their own local things. There's also a single copy policy between the RLFs. We do ask our depositors to check for duplicates before they send us their certificates. The RLFs participate in multiple shared print programs, principally the Western Regional Storage Trust and JAX. For the Western Regional Storage Trust, we act as an archive builder. The UC has an internal shared print program called JAX. That is short for Journal Archiving Campaign. And now that the active JSTOR project at our facility is wound down, we are archiving new JSTOR titles under the JAX umbrella, management structure, JAX now. So thinking about the actual page validation process that Shawn introduced to us, that did start at the SRLF in 2004 and was wrapping up right when I arrived in 2015, so I never actually saw or supervised the project. But from what I've heard, it was fairly significant, and the SRLF staff spent thousands and thousands of hours on this project over more than a decade. As of the last archive title report, SRLF had archived 2,200 titles consisting of over 100,000 volumes of JSTOR materials. The UC Library do continue to build the JSTOR archive by filling gaps and adding new titles under that JAX program that I mentioned earlier. Validation for these titles are identified as JSTOR now takes place at the issue level. We no longer can handle page validation. Amy did mention access to the dark archive at Harvard being fairly limited. Our collection is considered a dim archive. The page validated materials are only available for circulation within the UCs, and JSTOR, of course, can borrow their issues back if it's needed for redigitization. That is all I have the background on SRLF, and now I'm turning this over to Marine Waltz.
Thank you, Cathy. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rene Wetzel from the Center for Research Libraries. I'm the head of the Access Initiatives and Special Projects at CRL. And in my role at CRL, I oversee the JSTOR print archive. Our collection is also a dim archive, which means we will lend it to those who have a need for the print instead of the digital version. Many of our members and others rely on our collection so they can weed titles in theirs. We also accept donations to the collection from our members. We have approximately 65 to 75% of the JSTOR titles in the collection at any given time. But because JSTOR is a moving wall and they keep digitizing new titles, we are kept very busy trying to fill in what they've increased in terms of what they have in their collection. We verify our copies to the issue level. This means we guarantee we will have the issue, but not all its pages. Practically speaking, we do thumb through every issue, but we want to be clear that we did not check that the issue is intact. Over the years, we have learned a great deal about collecting print to match a digitized collection, which is a specific type of archiving. On to the next person.
It's our colleague, Shawn. It looks like you are still muted, Shawn. There it is. Oh, for a moment there, it looked like you were unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I'm Shawn Romaine, Director of Acquisitions and Rapid Cataloging Services on the West Technical Contact at the University of Washington in Seattle. The UW has been a member of West since 2011, and to date we have archived over 100,000 volumes at the bronze level. So we are an archive holder, not a builder, and everything we archive is at bronze, meaning our holdings are not validated before commitment, and many of the volumes are housed in open stacks. Like many academic libraries, we have been at or over capacity for physical shelving for several years. Over the past decade, we've been able to buy ourselves a little more time by opting to deselect runs of physical serials that are available electronically through JSTOR and also archived in West. We've been fairly conservative for what we do deselect, as the journals that are being considered for withdrawal must meet several criteria, including full electronic surrogates must be owned by the libraries, so we must have a JSTOR copy.
If not in JSTOR, then a digital file should be preserved in a trusted archive such as Portico or Clocks. The print copy must be accessible through West or another one of the smaller shared print programs in which we participate. In addition, the print journal must have little or no evidence of recent circulating use. And any print volumes containing images, graphs, or charts that do not render well electronically may be retained. So examples of reasons why a print title might be retained would include when the image quality and detail are notably superior in print, as is often the case for journals in the art, architecture, and biology disciplines. When the architectural value is significant, when the title is directly related to a unique collection strength of the libraries, or when the title is locally published or has a Northwest focus. Subject librarians are consulted prior to withdrawal and often work with faculty to identify titles meriting retention. As part of our deselection process, our access services staff will pull the physical volumes and they will spot check the JSTOR issues to make sure each physical issue has an electronic counterpart in JSTOR. They'll fan each physical volume to look for fold-out maps, plates, or charts, and check the online holdings to ensure that they have been scanned and are legible. They'll check that any supplements are available in JSTOR. If any of these fold-out maps, plates, images, or supplements are missing or illegible in JSTOR, the issues will be set aside to offer to JSTOR. We also note any gaps in the West holdings and offer to the West archiver or builder. And then we also check the journal retention and needs listing hosted by the University of Florida to see if other institutions have listed the deselected volumes as gaps, and then we will then offer those deselected volumes to those institutions. And Alison, it's now back to you.
Thank you so much, all panelists. So we are kind of a big panel, so we got together and talked about where we wanted to put our focus. We came up with this question that I'm going to put to our panelists now. I'd like to invite each panelist to reflect a little bit on how we can strengthen the print-digital connection for current and future JSTOR collections. And I think I'm throwing it to John first.
Yes. As I had noted in my earlier comments, JSTOR is not by any means an expert in print preservation or in the facilitation and administration of shared print programs, but we obviously do see the value in them. In 2015, we stepped back from funding page-level validation of the new journal titles with the University of California, although, as Amy noted, this level of validation continues at Harvard, where the original scanning copies that JSTOR owns are stored. And while CDL adds issue-validated titles to the JSTOR repository, our agreement with CDL has transitioned to one that is largely about the maintenance of the page-validated titles. This was done because we could see that the shared print community was much more vigorous and proactive than it was a decade earlier. So at this point, I think we're a little uncertain about what we can and should do to support this much more active shared print community. We have worked with CRL and Harvard to provide the Harvard Print Repository holdings data for inclusion in the paper database. And we have transferred the maintenance and provision of the JSTOR What to Withdraw tool to CRL. But we are also open to discussion with shared print programs about digitization of more broadly held, but still print-only titles that would be appropriate for inclusion in JSTOR. We would need to know that there is enough interest in the library community to move forward with that kind of idea, and that libraries would be willing to share in the cost in some way. Now that libraries have had 20+ years to deaccession print journal backruns and move them into shared print programs, and aggregators and publishers have been able to digitize thousands of journal backruns, one question is, which print journals are libraries still broadly holding because electronic versions are not available? Of course, this is one possible path to investigate, but we are open to others as well, and we do welcome engagement on this topic. And I will now hand it off to the next panelist.
I think we're going to hear from Shawn next.
Sorry, yes, it looks like I'm next. So just sort of following up on our our validation process. So our spot checking of JSTOR volumes shows that they're almost always complete and the scans are of a good quality, but they're not always perfect. So I think it's vital that the electronic surrogate not be missing anything, or, such as charts or pullouts, or be illegible, unless we have a sub-librarian or faculty member discover that we have deselected print without confirming that the electronic version was complete. That could be a public relations disaster for us, particularly as we do encounter resistance from some community members when we deselect print volumes. But one of the most time-consuming aspects of our deselection process is comparing the electronic surrogates to the physical copies. So, for example, since April 1st, Access Services staff have been working remotely, and so they've used part of that time to review the JSTOR coverage for close to about 7,000 of our print journal items that we are intending to deselect. And they've spent about 3,500 hours doing that. For 93% of these items, we found no apparent problems in any of the JSTOR scans. But for about 7% of those JSTOR volumes that were looked at, it looks like there may be either missing pages or articles. And in some cases, this may be just because there's a blank page on the JSTOR copy, and we need to verify that the print copy has a blank page, which we will do when we return to campus. In other cases, there may be a quality issue, so the scanned image, map, or text that is not fully legible in the scan, and again, that could be because the original image, map, or text was not of good quality in the print version. Or in some cases, a very small minority, but there may be minor issues like a typo in the JSTOR list of content, volume information is listed incorrectly, or the pages are out of order. So given the importance to our community of knowing that the digital version is complete and acceptable, and that it is indeed an acceptable alternative to print before we deselect, and given the staff time involved in validating the electronic version, is there a way we can leverage our shared print network to coordinate validation and recording of validation of digital versions so that validation needs only to be done once by one institution? How could we leverage this community to note that missing content has been reported and the gaps filled? We have a process in place, journal is one example, for validating and filling gaps for the print record. Can we come up with a similar procedure or community of practice for the digital record? And I'll turn it over now to Marie.
Yeah. Let me just check and see. Is my mic on? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. I think a lot of what Shawn said is really true, that we need to pay close attention to that. I also think the JSTOR print archive data that's created by institutions, once it's aggregated with other institutions, that can lead to problems. We're using databases like paper and OCLC to aggregate our data, and it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be in agreement with the JSTOR digital titles and other shared print program data. But aggregating journal data, when you toss it all together, sometimes the data actually doesn't match up, and it's not so simple as it seems. And sometimes JSTOR gives us a good working list for the digitized volumes and issues, but then we have to compare that to the print, and so the print all needs to match up. And the print from one library, the data may be incorrect. It may not match. For example, you may have one record showing that a title ends with 1978, while in JSTOR it might show it's ending in 1979. And so we need to check and make sure. Usually we can check from the JSTOR digital copy to confirm the end date, but then who's going to go back and fix it in OCLC, and who's going to tell everyone else so they can fix it in their local catalogs? And CRL does do some of this work prior to putting titles into paper, but it's tedious and time-consuming, and some libraries are electing not to fix their local records because they don't have the staff to do it. So that's a big problem in terms of the data. Another problem is title changes. JSTOR doesn't always reflect title changes in the same way as a cataloger might. And so catalogers at different times have had different criteria for when a title change occurred. So we don't always even agree within our own community about when a title change happens. So do we go with JSTOR's decision about when there was a title change, or do we ask JSTOR to do what we do? And can they do this? Do they have a lot of data that they would need to change in order to match up with our title change criteria? We also have a question about scarce titles. That was mentioned earlier by Heather as well, that we need to start thinking about what isn't archived. And in the case of the JSTOR print archive, there's about at least 100 titles that CRL has identified that were digitized by JSTOR but are not held in any print archive. Or indeed, there's maybe even only one library in the country that holds the title, and so they don't participate. And so if they don't participate in a shared print program, who's going to preserve these titles? And how do we convey that they're rare? Should we go out and recruit a copy, or should we offer to buy copies and store them in some agreed upon place? Do we decide we won't archive them? What's a good approach? And finally, there's gap filling. Every JSTOR archive has gaps. This goes back to the earlier discussion of the priority of titles as well. We need to start looking at what is not well archived by the community, because right now we can't rely on any program in particular. So I just have a few questions as well. How do we spend our JSTOR print archive resources? Do we spend our efforts filling gaps or acquiring titles that haven't been archived? Can we rely on each other's copies? If so, how much? How do we build a JSTOR print archive that can be useful for the community? And of course, I have to confirm, say, are we focusing too much of our energy on JSTOR when there are other journals that are more at risk and have not been digitized yet? And of course, I don't have answers for these questions, but I'm interested in what people have to say. Thank you.
Hi, so I think I'm up next. For my part of the question of the day, wearing my Harvard depository hat, I did just want to put it out there that I'm here to do my part to steward the Harvard-based print repository, the Dark Archive, and from that point of view, have a completely neutral opinion of the nature and scope of the collections in the repository, because we're there to provide housing and workflow expertise. And JSTOR provide the collections. But putting on my pan presenter hat, I'm surfacing the question is regarding subject area needs and how considering them strengthens the print-digital connection. And for some subject areas, there has been and may continue to be in the future a significant need for users to still see the physical content. Even when a digital surrogate exists, content that includes color reproductions, image-heavy print materials, so things like art history, architecture, biosciences, things that we're aware of, certainly. And so we may need to preserve more print copies in a distributed way to serve that need. In other words, be thinking about specific subject needs in relation to format and use subject area distinctions to decide what to retain and in what way. And as John mentioned, many libraries may still be, in fact, retaining these titles. Scholars and researchers who depend on the use of images may be likely to require access to print materials that are image heavy for some time. And these materials, even if a digital version does exist, may also be strong candidates for being re-digitized at some point as technology evolves over time. Therefore, adequate print must remain available to provide for access when it's needed in the future. A really good example is when JSTOR did a massive rescanning project around 2007, 2009 in order to facilitate the color image compositing that can be seen on the site today. And previous to that project, color content was presented as thumbnails under the main black and white image, but by rescanning and having had those items easily available, well preserved to rescan, JSTOR was able to capture location coordinates for the color portions of pages and then in turn composite those images with the black and white page image and therefore enhancing the content for the user. And that project actually used volumes from both the Harvard and UC print repositories. Really overall, I just wanted to put it out there that there's a need to think about retention in terms of some subject-specific print materials more broadly than for other subject areas that are much less print dependent at this time, so we can ensure access and preservation and availability for the future. Thanks.
We'll wrap up with our colleague Cathy from SRLF.
Hello, everyone. So I hear I wasn't quite loud enough last time, so I will try to speak up. So, as you have heard in our panel this afternoon, North American libraries have exerted a fair amount of energy as a community in supporting multiple archives of JSTOR print titles. While we have made tremendous progress, it seems like building and maintaining the JSTOR archive is clearly not a one-and-done operation. There are gaps to fill, digital versions to validate, data to compare, records to update, moving wall dates to consider, and new talent being brought into the JSTOR family at all. I believe that any expanded building and maintenance work around JSTOR titles needs to be done to the very best of our ability for two reasons we've already covered. One, JSTOR is a bedrock shared print collection. And two, the corpus is considered a fairly safe target for deselection. You know that JSTOR titles are getting scarcer every year. So, given this context and what my fellow panelists have presented to you today, it is my assertion that as our community resources allow, we are in a pandemic, we might want to re-engage as a community around the JSTOR corpus. If you find this brief argument compelling, I, like Marie, have a few questions that we might want to ask. Should we mobilize our community to engage in gap filling? How will we do that? How do we bridge the gap between digital and print management to ensure that the preservation of content is assured? We need to set up regular and consistent workflows to support adding new titles to the JSTOR digital and print collection. How do we do this work in an environment with increasingly limited staffing and resources? What is the role of JSTOR in this process? Please be assured that I am not suggesting we start a new group to look into re-engagement tasks around JSTOR. We have just the right amount of shared print groups talking about journal archiving at this time. Maybe one or more of those groups will be willing to ask a few of their folks to consider these questions. As I wrap up this panel for us today, I know I do not need to remind any of you that these JSTOR projects were some of the first examples of shared print work. They set the standard in many ways for the robust shared print community we enjoy today. And I look forward to seeing what discussions are sparked by this panel in the coming years. And I would like to send us off with a question to consider as a statement before we go to our Q&A portion. And it is, as goes JSTOR, so goes shared print. So with that, I thank you for your attention. And I will be turning this over to Alison, who will be facilitating our Q&A. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Cathy, and thank you to all the panelists. I personally have so much inspiration from hearing about your individual experiences with JSTOR. So we've left some time for questions. So if there are already questions in the chat, or if attendees have questions they'd like to address to a particular panelist, please enter those into the chat.
We don't have any questions at this time, but we've got plenty of time for people to submit them into the chat. So please feel free to submit those questions to the panel now. Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions. Again, there's a chance at the end of today to ask questions of any of today's presenters. So if something occurs to you between now and then, please submit that, and I'll be compiling the questions and I'll be asking the presenters at the end of today. Just give it a few more moments just to see if anything's coming through, because I know people have to type them into the chat and that can sometimes cause a delay.
Yeah, maybe I'll throw in another idea. Cathy raised the question of who should be doing this work, and the fact that we already have quite a few groups in our community of shared print, and we probably don't need another task force to be on. So I'm going to take shameless advantage of my participation in Rosemont and put the question, if any of my Rosemont colleagues are out there, is this a compelling area for Rosemont to address? I think, to me, particularly, immediate is this question of validation of the digital copy as we're working to retain the print copy, so that we are truly, so that our libraries could deselect in good faith what they are targeting.
No, I think you're right, Alison. Rosemont would make sense for the if a group was going to take this on, it would be Rosemont.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be also interested in seeing the list of that. I think Marie mentioned, or someone mentioned, 100 titles that weren't currently being preserved. I'd really like to see that and see which libraries are holding those, and again, see if those libraries are in any of our groups, and if not, then do some outreach to those libraries as well.
And that's something JSTOR might be able to help with as well, since we would normally have contacts at all libraries.
Great. So thank you again to all the panelists.